You'll also be able to get a certificate of attendance. At the end of the training, we'll have a survey link for you that will ask you a few questions about what you thought of the training, as well as you'll be able to put in your information and you'll get a certificate of attendance. The slides will also be sent to you afterwards. We also have some handouts that we'll put in the chat here today, but they'll be sent out in that email after the class. We're using Zoom today. Please use the Zoom chat. You can tell me where you're attending from. That's always fun to know. You can also ask questions through the Zoom chat, or you can use the Zoom Q&A. The Zoom Q&A allows you to ask questions anonymously if you're shy about asking something. And then the last Zoom piece of housekeeping is that closed captioning is available. You can turn that on in the Zoom ribbon if you need it. It does a pretty good job of tracking what I'm saying. I will try and tone down my Yooper accent so that it does understand what I'm talking about. And then this last piece is that we are going to be using Mentimeter today to have a little bit of interactivity between you and I as we're going through this training. So this is I will turn myself off so that you can get at the QR code. There we go. You can use the QR code if you've got a smartphone, or if you are watching on a computer, you can go to menti.com and enter in that 8-digit code. If you are shaky, you're not sure if you want to use Mentimeter right now, the code and the menti.com is going to be on every single slide as we go through here. So if you decide that you want to do it later on, please join us. And or if you get booted off for some reason, you can always rejoin using that menti.com and the code. And then if you are curious about the Menti, it does not track you in any way. You don't have to accept cookies if it asks you to accept cookies. And you also are anonymous on there. So I won't be able to know who you are, or you can feel free to state things without being embarrassed about maybe you said something wrong or anything. It's all right if we get answers wrong throughout today's training. So we'll give you just another couple of seconds to get that joined, and then we will continue on. All right, folks. And if you do need the QR code, we can always bring it up again. You can holler in the chat and we can do that. All right, folks. So what are we going to learn today? One of the things that I wanted to talk about today is what a learning objective is and why you should write them down, why you should write them in the first place, why you should write them down and think about them. Another piece is how to write an effective learning objective. You may have heard of learning objectives, you may even be using them, but are you using them effectively? And then the last piece is how to decide what kinds of resources could be helpful for you to use in your training. Not every resource is going to be built equally. Some are going to be more helpful than others, and how can we decide what we're going to be doing? All right, so when we are thinking about training, if you are starting from the very beginning, what should you be looking at? So the most basic breakdown is, what do you want people to learn? What do you want them to get out of this training? And that is probably something that's very specific. You're looking for a specific outcome. And one of the ways that we can determine, what do we want people to learn and kind of narrow that down is to make our learning objectives really specific. So my question for you guys is, as we start here, this is going to be an open-ended question for you, is what is a learning objective? What does that mean to you? When I say a learning objective, what do you think of? And you should be able to type these answers in and they'll pop up. And again, they're anonymous, so if you type it in and it's wrong, that's totally fine. So we got one person that says a goal. That's a good way to look at a learning objective. A goal for the training. Yeah. The purpose of the training. Yeah, why are we here? What are we trying to do? Main points of a training. What's expected? Yeah, what are we expecting participants to get out of the training? That's something that's really important, both for you before you start the training, but also for the students during the training. What are the expectations of this? What do we want people to know? What you want to learn? Yeah, what do we want to get out of this training? What are we trying to do? Perfect. All right, anybody else? No, those are all very good general definitions of what a learning objective is. So this is one way to look at it. If you want a specific outcome, you need specific goals. So several of you said that learning objectives are a goal. I would agree with that. If you are trying to train for a marathon, it's going to be more effective for you to follow a plan that is specifically for running, and specifically for running a marathon versus running like a 5K, as opposed to signing yourself up for old timers hockey, right? That's old timers hockey is going to get you probably more fit than if you did nothing, but it's not going to get you that specific goal of, I want to run a marathon. It can also be helpful when we're looking at these specific goals to set goals that are maybe a little bit smaller. So instead of starting off with, I'm going to run a marathon, maybe you start off with a plan to run a 5K. So when we talk about our learning objectives, we want them to be really specific. Learning objectives are going to help you organize your training. You can use them as somewhat of an outline for your training. It's going to make things more effective, because one of the things it's going to do is identify any gaps in training. If you're writing really specific learning objectives, it's going to help you to see like, oh, I can't ask people to learn this until I've taught them this other thing, to build off of that. You need that foundational knowledge. And it also kind of helps you figure out, like, maybe my audience is in different places. I know some of you have probably done training for longer than I've done training. So some of these things, you know, you can kind of suss out where your audience might be. You can think about that as you're writing these learning objectives, and maybe how you can take advantage of some of that knowledge. So a learning objective has three parts to it. So one part is that it conveys how a student will be different after the training. How are we going to change them? So usually that breaks down into a new skill that they're going to learn, new knowledge that they're going to have, or a behavior that's going to change after they've had this training. Learning objective also conveys how and when that success is going to be measured. So what are we using as a criteria for a successful training? And how long does somebody have in order for them to demonstrate that they are successful? And then the last piece is that it conveys any specific conditions that are going to apply. So you want to have something specific. You might not want to say, like, I'm going to teach somebody to drive. It might be, I'm going to teach someone to drive this specific equipment, or I'm not going to teach somebody how to use a computer. That's a really broad thing. It would be, you know, I'm going to teach someone how to use this specific software to accomplish this specific task. So what's different after this training? What are we going to get? So that knowledge, we're either going to obtain some knowledge. So that might be something like explaining updates to a manual or new specifications. That's usually the easiest one to teach and to assess, because they either learned it or they did not learn it. A skill, so maybe it's operating forklift, maybe it's using new software, something like that. That one, again, can be a little bit easier to assess, because, again, somebody either can do what you need them to do or not. Behavior is going to be a tougher one. So that might be something like adopting a new safety standard, or maybe you're implementing a new quality control procedure. Those ones are going to be a little bit harder, both to measure whether your training has been effective, but also just to teach. Because when you are trying to alter a behavior, you are trying to change people's attitudes about something. And especially if they have, they might not even be like, you know, not receptive to this new thing that you're trying to implement. They might be receptive, but sometimes it can be hard to break habits, especially if it's something that people do over and over again. So how do we write good learning objectives? So many of you talked about that they are a goal, and that's a great way to think about it when you are trying to write your learning objectives. So have you heard of SMART goals? Sometimes the letters for that acronym mean slightly, sometimes the A is attainable instead of achievable. But the SMART goal system is something that's specific, something that's measurable, something that is achievable or attainable, something that's relevant to the person, and to have some type of timeline for achieving this. So when you are trying to write your learning objectives, thinking in terms of SMART learning objective can be a helpful way to organize your thoughts. So when we talk about something being specific, we want to break a large scale down into small tasks. So again, you're not going to say that I'm going to teach someone how to use a front end loader. You're going to talk about specific parts of using the front end loader. You know, maybe starting off with doing a 360 walk around, maybe doing a equipment inspection before you start operating it. Whatever those very beginning pieces, thinking about somebody who has never done this, what would they need to know? It's okay to have a ton of learning objectives, especially if you are teaching something that's really complex. You might have 30 or more learning objectives because you want each one of them to be very specific. And sometimes with your learning objectives, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to teach each one of those things kind of in a vacuum, right? So you might be teaching several learning objectives at the same time because they overlap with one another. But by writing each of them down, again, you're going to eliminate those possibilities to have gaps in what you're trying to teach. And again, the more specific you are with things, the easier it is to evaluate whether someone has been successful. So if you are talking about maybe updates to a specification and you want to make sure that people understand what the changes have been, having a learning objective for each one of the changes makes it easy to assess whether or not people understand each piece of that. So this is a chance for you guys to write in, again, this is a typed in question. What's a specific skill, task, piece of information that you are currently having to teach to someone else? Almost all of us have to teach something to somebody, and whether it is a super formal process or not, learning objectives can be really helpful to kind of organize your thoughts. So procedures, how to review legal descriptions. Can we get more specific than even that? On what kind of procedures, what kind of legal descriptions, how to make effective logbook entries. Excellent, that's a really specific thing. Road design standards. We could get even more specific with that one. Documentation requirements. Can we get more specific? Documentation for construction, documentation for design, procurement procedures. Managing employees. How to assess a trail for accessibility standards. That's a really great, nice, specific one. How to write daily construction inspection reports. That's a good, specific one. How to report non-compliance with yes, that's a really good, specific one. Can we get more specific with using software applications? Which kinds of software applications? And you don't necessarily have to type these in, but just start to think about that. How to review plans and ensure they contain all the required components. That's a really broad thing. That's more specific than maybe plan review, right? But that's still really broad. Entering projects into JobNet. Yeah. And I'm sure there are many parts and pieces to that process. Do we have any others? Managing employees is a really broad one as well. Managing them to do something specific, managing them, managing in and of itself is a really broad verb. So one of the things that can be really helpful when we're looking at these tasks is verbs. So Pete has a really helpful list of verbs. Just a giant list of verbs. We'll drop that into the chat for you. And using those verbs can kind of help you to figure out very specific tasks. When we're using these, how to enter data into data management application, how to write a standard operating procedure. Yeah, that is going to be a very specific task for each one of those operating procedures, but there is a general flow to how you do that work. So that can also be helpful. Writing these learning objectives, you can kind of get a sense of what is maybe universal through many different tasks, especially like with the standard operating procedures. There's going to be some things that are going to be the same throughout all of them, but then each one is going to have its own nuances. Same thing with reviewing plans and or doing documentation. There's going to be some things that are going to be universal, and then some things where they'll be different. All right, let's look at things that are measurable. So When we talk about something being measurable, we want to think about how are we determining whether somebody is successful? Do they do it perfectly every time? Is it just that they have improved over what their past performance is? Do they get it right 7 out of 10 times? Thinking about how we're measuring success is going to let us know if we're done training, right? So if a lot of the time, especially with internal trainings, we train once and then we're like, good luck, see you later. And we don't go back and review things. We don't do periodic review of, do you know this information? A lot of times when it is something that is safety related, you do have the requirement to do some type of refresher course. But a lot of other trainings, you might get trained when you first start that job. And then after that, there is no formal process to see, like, are you doing it right? Do you have this? Are there any places where maybe you misunderstood something? So having a measurable goal for when we have completed the training and we are successful is really helpful, because then you can go back and say, are we still meeting that goal? Has anything changed? Do we need to maybe do some refreshers? And then the other piece with measurable goals is that word choice matters. Again, Pete has those verbs that were dropped into the chat. Using the right word to assess whether something is measurable is really helpful. So something like understand is such a broad idea, right? How can you really tell whether somebody understands? Using a word like explaining, can somebody explain back to you what you taught them? That is a much better measure of whether or not they've learned what you were trying to teach. Can somebody demonstrate if you have a skill? Can they demonstrate that they know how to do this? That's a much better way to measure than to say, do they understand? And then with the other piece of this is that when somebody is explaining or demonstrating, gives you that opportunity to catch mistakes or misunderstandings before somebody gets maybe into a bad habit of doing something, or maybe is doing something unsupervised where you don't even realize that they did not understand that, or maybe your training missed a key piece of information that they have kind of filled in the gaps themselves. And so having that ability to measure gives you peace of mind that they learned it, as well as gives them the ability to be successful. All right, so here's a question for you. How do you gauge whether or not learners have learned the content? So we've got a few choices here. One is job performance. You just maybe a yearly job performance review. If they're doing what they need, maybe you have a written test that they have to take. That might be something like, we just went through our cybersecurity training here at Michigan Tech. And so there is an online little written test that you're taking. Maybe it's a verbal test. You just have somebody repeat back to you or explain what they're doing. It might just be that they're demonstrating on as they go along that they know something. Or maybe you don't have any type of formal assessment. I think that is probably more common than we think, where we do training and then people exit whatever conference room or garage room, whatever they were in. And then we don't actually really have a way that we are formally assessing whether people have done that. And then for those of you who are saying that you're demonstrating that knowledge or skill, if you want to, if you're able, can you put into the chat maybe how you are doing that? Is it a formal process, or is it something that's a little bit more informal, where if you get it, great, we assume that things are going well. And if you aren't getting it, it's going to be obvious to us because things will be going poorly. Because again, I think oftentimes we don't necessarily formalize this process, or we don't have something that is maybe broken into chunks. So it's not that you have to either get it all, you understand all of it, or you don't kind of get credit for knowing any piece of it. There's no partial credit for things. All right. So we've talked about the S and the M, specific, measurable. Now let's talk about achievable. So again, having something that's broken down into modules, especially if it's a really complex or extensive type of topic, is going to be more helpful for people because it gives you the opportunity to make sure that they have the foundation and the building blocks to build off of. But it also gives the learner the opportunity to succeed and build a little bit of confidence. If you aren't having those kind of periodic check-ins to make sure that people do understand the nuances or the fundamental pieces of what you are training, then they get to the end and they don't know what they're doing. And that is really discouraging, especially if they put a lot of time into whatever this training is. Whether it is, videos that they've watched or training that they've sat through, and then they get to the end and they realize, I don't actually understand this, or somebody is telling them, oh, you're doing this wrong. It's a real confidence killer for people. So letting people have the ability to periodically check in and be evaluated is going to be a much more effective way to gauge their learning than to get to the end of something and then check. So that even with this training today, right, I'm asking you guys questions as we go along to kind of gauge, what do you know? Maybe what can I impart to you as we're going through this? All right, so that's the S specific, M measurable, A achievable, R is relevant. So especially with adult learners, with children in school, everything is new to them, but with adults, they have some different motivations for why they are learning things, as well as they have past experience too, and you need to be cognizant of that. So adult learners are going to lose motivation if a topic isn't applicable to them. They need to know why. Why are we learning this? Why are you making me sit through this? They need to know how it's going to benefit them. And another piece that's really important with adult learners is separating what do they need to know in order to do their job effectively versus what you want to teach. Sometimes those things are not the same. Most of the time, there's at least quite a lot of overlap. Hopefully, there's quite a lot of overlap. But sometimes people get kind of in the weeds with what is nice for them to know versus what they need to know. So for an example, in this particular class, I could have gone into a whole bunch of teaching theory and where all of this information comes from and stated a bunch of resources and a bibliography of all of this stuff, right? People go to school for education, they get PhDs in education. That isn't going to help you. Also, this is a 1-hour lunch and learn. That isn't going to help you make your training more effective. So we narrowed it down to, let's talk about learning objectives and how to write them and how to make them effective. And so hopefully that is what is going to be most relevant to you today. So how do you show that your training is relevant to your trainees? This is an important piece of the puzzle. If you're not telling people why they should pay attention, why they should learn this content, it's really difficult to hold people's attention or to engage them in order to learn. So hopefully for this training, the reason that is relevant for you as a trainer is because you want to make your training more effective. You want your employees or your coworkers to learn things. Using current project examples, that's really helpful. Yes, so using examples that are relevant, especially it can be really helpful. Sometimes it's embarrassing, right? But if you can use examples when things did not go well, so that people can learn from other people's mistakes as opposed to making their own mistakes, especially like with safety training, that can be really helpful. Like, do not do this thing that got someone hurt really badly. Discussion on why we do what we do. Yes. Highlight goals and outcomes. How the topic can assist them in their day-to-day work. Yes. How does this relate directly to what you are doing on a day-to-day basis? Maybe it's something that keeps them safe. Explaining the why. Yeah, showing the benefit, showing what do we gain from doing this. Maybe we gain time, maybe we gain budget, maybe we gain something else, safety. Explaining the benefits. Yeah. Some of the other things, sometimes training is it's going to be maybe harder to show some of the benefit of them. Some of the required trainings that we do here at Michigan Tech, sometimes it's like, oh, this is a bit of a slog, right? One of the things is it's required for me to work here. I have to do this training. It is a requirement of my employment here at Michigan Tech to do this training. Yeah, some of the trainings are exactly, some is required by law. Sometimes you have training where it's like, you have to do this because the law says so. how the task can advance your career. Yeah, sometimes training is something that we can do that will help us get a promotion or help us get a different job. Discussing regulations that require us to do the task. Yeah, why the regulation is important. That can be a really big piece of this. A lot of times regulations, especially on the safety side or the design side, if we got engineers in the group, a lot of those regulations are written because something bad happened and we are trying to prevent that from happening again. And so that can be really important. When we're talking about some of these, how do we make this relevant? It is not, you're not playing dirty if you appeal to people's emotion. So, you know, hey, I want you to come home safe to your family, or I would like, you know, the bridges and roads that we drive on every day to be safe. Because, you know, I have family that drives on these roads and you have family that drives on these roads. We would like people to be safe. Share examples of project proposals so the trainee can see what the finished product is. Yeah, so what's the end goal? What are we trying to work towards? How do we get there with these pieces? That can be really helpful too, because sometimes when we're doing trainings, especially if we have made things into modules, it can feel very disconnected. So if we can show like, this is what we're working towards, this is the end goal, the end product that we're trying to get to, that can be really helpful. If you can put trainings under an umbrella of this is the type of project that we're working towards or the type of work that we're doing, that can be really helpful too. It could be, you know, this is what we do for this, maybe for bridge projects, for design, or maybe it is, here are all sorts of things that are related to summer road maintenance. If we can group things together, that can be helpful. All right. So we have the S specific, M measurable, A achievable, R relevant, and then the last piece is timeline. How soon do we want people to be able to do this? Sometimes it's by the end of the training. You walk out of the training and you should be able to do this. Sometimes it's like by the 10th time that they do this, they should be able to. Maybe if it's a requirement for their employment, maybe it's by the end of their probationary period after they've been hired. Whatever your timeline is when you're writing your learning objectives, you want to be specific about that, because it also gives you a sense of like, if somebody is struggling and they're not meeting that timeline, maybe there are things that you can do to help. Maybe they need a little bit of one-on-one coaching, or there's other things that maybe they need more resources or different resources. And then the last piece is that we want to make sure that we are matching the complexity of whatever it is we're trying to teach them to a timeline. Again, like when we're talking about some of the training, you're not going to expect someone to be able to do something that a senior person can do when you've just hired them and this is the first time that they're ever using that piece of equipment or using that software. You got to give people some time to master things, but you also want to set some type of end goal so that they know what is being expected of them. All right, so here is another question. I will turn my video off so you can see all the options. How quickly do you expect learners to master a new skill? So is it something where we are expecting them immediately after they're doing the training within a predetermined amount of time, maybe a week, a month, by the end of their probationary period? Or maybe you don't set time limits for new skills that must be learned. I think that I was expecting this to be more on we don't have a set time limit, because a lot of times people don't necessarily think about that when they are doing trainings, or it is something that is a really basic thing that we're doing the training, and immediately after you have done the training, we expect that you know what you're doing. So I feel like even if you are already writing learning objectives, these are some things that you can use to make your learning objectives more effective by being really specific, using some of those action verbs that Pete had dropped into the chat, using some of the ideas of how are we going to make this measurable, how are we measuring it, how are we determining whether somebody is successful, and then setting a timeline. How soon do we want people to be able to do this? All right, so I want you guys to practice. Think about a training that you are currently doing and write a really specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely learning objective for that. So oftentimes when we're writing learning objectives, the first round requires a little bit of tweaking. So I wanted you guys to write some learning objectives, and then we'll discuss them. Again, this is anonymous, so we don't know who wrote which one. But write some learning objectives, and then we'll talk about them, and maybe we can make them more specific, more measurable, more achievable, more relevant to people, and put some type of end time goal for them. So we'll give you a couple of minutes here to write some out. You can also, if you would like to, you can put them in the chat if you aren't using Mentimeter. Again, if you want to join Mentimeter, you can join at menti.com up at the top, way up there. There's a code. Or you can also put them into the Q&A if you want to be anonymous and you don't have the ability to join with Menti. But we'll give you a couple of minutes here to write out some learning objectives. All right, let's take a look at some of these. These are great. These are great. Again, the first time that you write learning objective, oftentimes it takes like at least one edit, maybe two edits, because you get some of the pieces, but not all of the pieces. Oftentimes I write my learning objectives and then I send it to Pete and I'm like, hey, help me fix these. And vice versa. So let's talk about how about this one? At the end of the session, participants will be, so at the end of the session, we've said that by the end of this training, you got to know how to do this. We'll be able to understand what a logbook is. So again, understand is kind of a vague, wishy-washy type of verb. Is there something else that we could maybe explain what a logbook is? Or maybe they can tell me what each piece of the logbook is, like what kind of information goes in each place, right? Because I've done that before. I developed a form where I thought it was really obvious what you put in each piece, and then people put different information into some of the boxes than what I had intended. So having that, even breaking that understanding of what a logbook is, break that down into even smaller pieces. Understand the regulatory requirements with respect to the logbook record keeping. Hard to talk. So again, understand, maybe it's explain, or maybe it's advocate for why the logbook record keeping is important for regulatory requirements. How about one of the next ones? Trainees should know how to accurately georeference and digitize easement maps at the end of this session. That's a great one. I would add something to what we mean by accurately, especially when we're talking about georeferenced information. So does accurately mean within a certain amount of error? Something that tells us what does accurately is a great word to add in here. But having something that would tell me how are we measuring what accurate means. Identify the 8 elements of a sanitary survey within the first 6 months of hiring. That's a great one. That's perfect. No notes on that one. That's great. Effectively communicating with residents. How about what kind of communications are we talking about here? Are we talking about face-to-face communications? Are we talking about written communications? Is it both? that can be really helpful to kind of, because those are different skill sets, right? Being able to effectively write like a PR release, a public relations or a social media thing is going to be a different skill set than being able to walk up, knock on a door, and talk to somebody. I have met some people who can do one and are very bad at the other. And so how are we going to measure what that means? We don't have a way to measure with that one for sure. And we also could be a little bit more specific about what we're talking about with the communications. Trainees will learn the effects of drug and alcohol and know tolerable limits by the end of this session. That one looks great. Pete, jump in here if you've got any of them that you think you want to talk about. At the end of the session, you will understand the regulations we operate under and be able to comply with safety laws on the road. All right, so again, that understand, I do the same thing. A lot of the time I write my learning objectives and I have understand in there. And then it's what I would encourage you to do is, again, write your learning objectives and then go back in and kind of tweak things. Use a verb that is going to be more, more descriptive about what it is that we are specifically trying to do and how are we measuring that. So with this one, you know, again, understanding doesn't really tell me how are you going to measure this? Are you going to say at the end of the session, you'll be able to complete a written exam that details how we operate and comply with safety laws, or maybe it's a verbal oral exam, something like that.
And that one, safety laws could be, which safety law? Is it the safety law to operate a vehicle on the road? So not being under the influence of alcohol? Or is it more of a safety law? You're actually working within the right of way and we should be following the MUTCD guidelines for how we sign everything and then what PPE we're wearing. So there's so many things you can add into that and get a lot more detail.
Yes, having that specificity about what kind of work are we doing. Perform testing on samples in an efficient manner. How are we measuring whether that's efficient? Is it, I want you to be able to process 5 samples in an hour or something like that. Something that gives you some, what does efficient mean? Take care to double check your method and recorded data. Maybe that means that we don't want any mistakes. 0 mistakes are acceptable. Maybe it is a something that will be checked by another person, and we can say that, you know, upon quality control or quality assurance check, you have less than whatever, 1%, 0.5%, 5%, whatever makes sense, number of errors. And again, that's something where we want to acknowledge that we are all humans and we make mistakes. That's why there's an eraser on the end of the pencil, right? But having something to let people know there are some situations where we don't want to have mistakes. We want to minimize mistakes. And usually in those situations, we have another human being who is going to be doing a check on whatever the work is. So having that, you know, what is an acceptable number of mistakes for someone to make? Because oftentimes there is, yeah, we're human, but you can't just be making tons of mistakes all the time that someone is then being expected to catch for you. At the end of the session, participants will be able to create a spreadsheet using Microsoft Excel to track their operator training and explain why training needs to be tracked. That's a great one. That's a great one. You might also put in something about, you know, is this an ongoing thing? Is this a one-time thing that they're going to have to be doing? Is it a spreadsheet that they're going to have to access and update periodically as they go? Lots of ways to make these more specific. Let's see if there are other ones that maybe we could. Yeah.
Top. Achieve correct crown when grading a gravel road. You can add a little bit more detail on that instead of just saying it has to be the correct crown. Maybe you could say, grade a gravel road that is within 4 and 6% of a crossload. So add a little bit more measurable details instead of just the correct crown, maybe something what they have to shoot for. Because when you're grading gravel road, it may be some flexibility, of course, with when you're actually grading it. And maybe you can add some other things on how it's measured. Maybe you're using a salt meter on the motor grader, but maybe you should calibrate it as well. So maybe another thing you can add to it that's kind of separate, but something that should be done as well.
Yeah, again, when we were talking about that at the beginning, you might need to have lots of learning objectives. That's okay. You want to have a lot of them so that they are very specific to whatever it is that you're doing. And yeah, with with achieving correct crown, do people understand what correct crown is for various situations? That might be a learning objective. Again, that might be one of those pieces where that's a fundamental building block. Do people know what correct crown is? And then do they know how to achieve that for a given situation? All right. So we can talk some more maybe at the end if we've got a little bit of time. If you got questions about learning objectives, we can talk a little bit more about it. But let's talk a little bit quickly about learning styles. So you may have heard this is a really common thing of like, I'm more of a visual learner, or I'm more of a hands-on learner, or I learn best alone. I don't work well in groups, right? I'm an engineer. I heard that one a lot in school of like, no, I want to do this by myself. I don't want to work in a group, which is kind of funny because everything you do once you have a job and you're working in a group, whether you want to work in a group or not. Even if you are a single person contractor, one-man shop kind of a situation, you still have clients, you still, guess what, working in a group. So when people talk about like, I prefer to watch a video, or I prefer to read a manual, that is not how people learn best. That individual does not learn best by reading a manual or watching a video. That's what they prefer to do. So the idea of learning styles, it's not how you learn best, it's how you prefer to learn. And so sometimes you have to do something that you do not prefer, AKA sometimes you got to eat your vegetables. So let's have an example of learning to cook, right? So let's say you've got a recipe and you have to make this recipe. What is going to be the most helpful if you're attempting a brand new recipe? Is it going to be a video demonstration? Or maybe it's having one-on-one help from an expert. A chef is going to come to your house and help you make this. Maybe it's watching a live demonstration. You go somewhere and there's a chef that does a demonstration and then you try it back at home. Maybe it's having an expert walk you through the steps over the phone. We're coming up, we still have Halloween, but we're coming up on Thanksgiving, and Butterball has their Butterball turkey hotline, right? You can call them and they will walk you through how to cook your turkey so that you do not blow your house up if you're deep frying it, or, make your guests get salmonella if you are trying to cook a frozen turkey from frozen. Or maybe reading the recipe, no pictures in this recipe. It's just words, just steps. What do you think is going to be the most helpful for you? So most folks, we've got kind of a tie here between having one-on-one help from an expert, somebody that's going to come, they're going to walk you through each piece of this. And we got a lot of people that say reading the recipe, even if there's no pictures. And then the next most common answer here is a video demonstration. We'll give you another couple of seconds to decide what we think. Most people are saying having that one-on-one help is going to be the most effective thing. So there's pros and cons to all of these, right? So reading a recipe, there's a pro to that. You have something that you can refer back to. That's really nice. But not having any pictures is kind of not as helpful. Having one-on-one help from an expert, that's really helpful. But it also, there's the potential for the expert to step in and do more of the work than letting you do it. I know I have had that experience in the kitchen with my mom. Sometimes she's just gonna hip check you out of the way. And next thing you know, you are not actually doing this. She has moved in and she's doing all of it. A video demonstration, it depends, right? A video demonstration that I have the ability to pause and refer back to, rewind maybe, that might be more effective than a video that I watch in a group in a conference room with a bunch of other people. I don't have the ability to pause it. I don't have it available to me while I'm doing the work. And then same thing with watching a live demonstration. There's definitely value to that, but it's not something that I can refer back to. It's not something that I can necessarily pause. and then having an expert walk you through things on the phone. Better than nothing, right? Better than just going it alone completely, but maybe not as effective as some of these other things. So what might contribute to your ability to master that new recipe? What kinds of things might impact whether or not this is a type in one, whether or not you successfully cook whatever this recipe is? The opportunity to practice. Yes. Do I get one shot to make this, or do I have a couple of shots, right? Sometimes you see people like on cooking competition shows, they're obviously excellent cooks, but they're given ingredients they've never worked with before, and they have to figure out how to cook something. They don't have the chance to practice, and so they fumble. Sometimes you fumble. The clarity of the instructions, yes. Really clear written instructions might be better than a video that does not have a lot of camera angles, or the audio is really bad, something like that. Your understanding of the terms used. Yes, that's a huge one. Do you understand what you are being asked to do? How patient you are. Yeah. Sometimes I know some folks who cook everything on high, whether it should be or not. Repetition, practice making mistakes, improving, getting assistance. Yes. Do you have the ability? So the phone call to somebody, you know, the Butterball hotline, right? They're experts in cooking turkeys. So having that assistance from somebody that knows what they're doing is really helpful. How much time? Yes. The ability to measure. Yeah. I don't know if any of you have gotten recipes where everything is in grams instead of in cups. That can be fun because you got to convert everything and make sure that did you convert it correctly, or you got to bust out a scale. Meaning, do I have to fry something versus just mixing and baking? Yes. Converting the units, yes, for sure. Do I have the appropriate tools? That's huge, right? I don't know if any of you have ever gone to somebody else's house. I had an aunt and uncle who hosted Thanksgiving one time, and I have another aunt who was trying to make gravy, and the folks who were hosting did not have any poultry seasoning or sage, which are two things that are kind of important when you're making Thanksgiving gravy. Quality of the example images used within the recipe, yes. Repetition, do I have a chance? That's a big piece. Another big piece is pressure, right? Is this something, am I making dinner for my in-laws who I am meeting for the first time, right? Or my, potential in-laws that I'm meeting for the first time? Or is this just like a Tuesday night and I'm just trying a new recipe because I felt like it? Those are different situations, right? So someone might, especially if they are doing something where they have to perform at a certain level during a test, maybe it's a licensing test or a certification type test, you want to make sure that that person is over prepared a little bit, right? Because you're going to have a little bit of nerves. Quality of equipment. Yeah, that is huge too. If you've got a one rusty pot to try and use to make your recipe versus having a beautiful set of copper pots and a wonderful, beautiful test kitchen to be working in, that's going to be a little bit different. All right. So we can also consider, driver education. If the cooking example didn't fit for you, when you think about driver's education, there's a classroom portion where you sit down, you're a new driver in high school, you're 15, 14 years old. You sit down and you learn things like, what do the signs mean? And what do the pavement markings mean? And how far away do I need to be? And all these types of things. And then there's a hands-on portion. A driving instructor goes out with the new driver in the vehicle, and there are some safety measures, right? Like they've got the extra brake pedal on their side, but there's a hands-on portion. You get the chance to practice and make mistakes in a hopefully safe environment. If we only did one of those, if we only had a classroom portion and then we just sent kids out to learn to drive with no hands-on portion, sent them out to test, a lot more kids would fail their driver's test on the first try, right? If we only had the hands-on portion and we didn't have any classroom portion, there would be a lot of people who would not know what some signs meant, what some pavement markings meant, what to do when they encounter something that is not usual for them, something that's unusual. Like, for example, up here in the Keweenaw Peninsula, we don't really have roundabouts. It's not something that we get a lot of. So trying to practice how to navigate a roundabout isn't something that you can do unless you drive to Ishpeming. So having the ability to learn in a classroom setting, what is a roundabout? How do you navigate them? What do the pavement markings mean? Is important for drivers that are up here. All right. So let's quickly talk about resources. Resources when you are doing training. So we've provided a few resources here. We've got the action verbs. There's also another resource that we'll give to you about learning objectives. We want to think about what's going to be useful for someone, what's going to be relevant. So if you have a task that is infrequent, it's more important for people to know where to find help when they need it, right? Than it is going to be for them to sit through a very detailed training about how to do this thing that they do once a year. So it might be something like how to sign up, how to renew your health insurance through your workplace. You know, you have the annual sign up. How do we do that? That's probably going to be a handout or a video that walks you through it. Something that can be really helpful for these types of things is to screen record your computer or your phone screen and then send that to people. And something that I would encourage people to do, it doesn't have to be perfect. If you flub your words up a little bit, that's fine. This is still going to be an effective supplement for people. And with the recording, you know, on your computer, you can open up a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting where you are the only person in it, and then run through whatever it is. Or on your phone, again, you can hit screen record and, you know, record a little video of how to navigate through things. If it's something that is going to be frequent, having less detailed handouts might be more helpful. Oftentimes when we talk about something that we are doing frequently, again, like I said, kind of at the beginning, we kind of treat that as never needing to be reviewed. You should periodically do some training on things, even if they are something that you do on a daily basis. And you're like, everybody definitely knows how to do this, because sometimes somebody might have a great hack, right? And they've been doing this for years and they haven't shared it with anybody. And then one of the other pieces with a really frequent task is if you have to change behavior on something that is a frequent task, especially something, you know, a safety or a quality control or a new way of maybe submitting an expense report or new software that you're using, something like that. Having training about that has some follow-up to it is going to be really helpful, because it is really hard to break habits that we have. Even again, if people are consciously trying to do the new thing, muscle memory sometimes takes over and we do what we know. The last little piece as we get to the top of the hour here is I want to encourage people to think about this quote from Mark Twain when you're doing your trainings and trying to improve your training, is that continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection. So a lot of times we are like, we got to revamp everything. No, any small changes that you make to your training is going to be an improvement from whatever you did before. So we try and live by that here at CTT. We have tried to upgrade some of the technology that we use. We have tried to upgrade some of the trainings that we do, how they look, make things maybe a little bit more interactive, a little bit more modern looking, but we didn't do it all overnight, right? It's been small incremental steps, and we have plans to do more things, but you don't have to do it all at once. Any improvement that you make is better than what you had before. So what I would encourage you to do is pick a training and just really think about your learning objectives. Write down what it is that we are trying to do and see if there maybe is a resource that would be helpful for people, or maybe there is some extra slides or some supplemental information that people might find helpful. Maybe people who don't have all of the information. One of the things that we're working on is having kind of like a video that we can send to people that is a pavement 101 video. Because we recognize that not everybody has a construction or an engineering background, and they might not know all of the terms that we use in some of our pavement inspection classes. So having that information is going to help you to make things better. But again, any improvements that you're making is better than what we had before. And if you wait for things to be perfect, you're never going to do anything. So I encourage you, start small, but start. And with that, I want to say thank you. If you have any questions, Pete and I will be here. Pete's going to put in a SurveyMonkey link into the Zoom chat that you can use that will be how you get your certificate of attendance. Once you've completed that survey, you're free to go. We really appreciate that you came. We've got some other trainings that are coming up this fall. You can go to ctt@mtu.edu or ctt.mtu.edu, and you can look up what our upcoming trainings will be. But again, thank you for attending. Let us know in that SurveyMonkey evaluation and certificate of attendance form what we can do to make this better. We're going to try and do more of these lunch and learns in the coming year. And so we appreciate all of your feedback. And with that, again, thank you for attending. Pete and I will be here. If you have any problems with the SurveyMonkey link, let us know. But thank you so much for attending, and we hope to see you at a future training.